Hello, welcome to another Brookbanks podcast. I'm your host, Ben Wakeling, Head of Cost and Commercial here at Brookbanks. Today I've got with me Annabel Le Lohe, who is Associate Director in our planning team at Brookbanks, and I'm delighted to welcome Sam Stafford, Managing Director at the Land Planning and Development Federation. Today we're going to be talking about all things planning, as you've probably guessed, but before we dive in, I'll just ask our guests to introduce themselves. So Sam, let's start with you.
Hi, thank you, Ben. Hi, Annabelle. Thank you so much for the invitation. Sam Stafford. I've been with the LPDF since May this year. Before that, I spent 3 years as planning director at the Home Builders Federation. 8 years before that at Barratt doing strategic land, mostly a planning consultant before then. Hopefully, everybody is familiar with the LPDF and the work that we do. We've got about 160 odd members in total. 180 maybe, 60 full members, land promoters, builders, big and small, people who invest time and money and risk in bringing land forward through the planning system are our full members. And then the affiliate members, of which Brookbanks is a very valued contributor, are what I like to call the planning system ecosystem. So consultants, lawyers, technical specialists. So a wide range of interests that we try to represent in representations on government policy, for example. So that's me and us.
Thank you. Annabel?
Yes, so thank you for having me on, Ben. It's a pleasure to join this series that's been ongoing. And I've been at Brookbanks for 3 and a bit years now or so. So joined from an SME house builder prior to that, based in Milton Keynes and working across the southeast. And prior to that, consultancy work as well, kind of in the same geographical region. So a very challenging area to sort of start the career in, exciting at the time with what was known as the ARC from Cambridge to Oxford, but a bit of a dying term there.
Wonderful. No, it's great to have you both on. It would be remiss of me actually not to mention that this is our first podcast with a valued member from the LPDF. We had a chat with Paul Brocklehurst, who's the chairman of LPDF, a while ago. I think that's out already if you wanted to have a look at that. That was all about SMEs. Today we're talking about planning. So we are at the start of 2026 now. 2025 has been and gone. It's in the rearview mirror. But what did it bring to the industry in terms of key moments for planning, reform? How did the government progress its ambitions to this 1.5 million homes target? Was it essentially a good year for the planning industry? Sam, if I could start with you.
That's a really good question. Ben. Um, I, my sense was towards the end of 2025, almost a degree of frustration. I almost, I heard it suggested that 2025 may have ended up being a wasted year, which I thought when I first heard that, I thought that was a little harsh. But I think what the person who said that was getting at was basically that the new government back in the middle of 2024 went big early with two very, very significant interventions insofar as changes to the standard method for calculating local housing need are concerned. Moving to, let's not dive too far into the detail, although let's assume that it's mostly planners listening to a planning-based podcast, but a standard method that increased national requirements from about practically 280,000 to about 370,000, with increases in every region apart from London. That was big, but arguably the grey belt proposition was arguably bigger. And that's a theme that's run through this year. But fundamentally, land that has for a generation, or the housing on land that for a generation has been inappropriate in planning terms, in certain circumstances now is appropriate, and is being subject and can be subject to a planning application. So they were two big, bold things very early on. And then 2025 seemed to have been characterised by by a series of working papers at the start of the year, which is, to my unsophisticated mind, a good way of working. It's a good way of the government testing industry sentiment on live issues. Why is it a live issue? What should the government do about it? Do you like this as a solution? So things, for example, the statutory consultees was promised. That only emerged later in the year, but the national scheme of delegation around changes to planning committees, site size thresholds, changes to BNG, all of those kinds of things. So there's encouragement early in the year that the government were grasping with some of the more practical day-to-day issues, and then there was a kind of sense of drift up until the end of 2025 when we've had the NPPF. Everybody's working working their way through the implications of that. So yeah, my general sense, without waffling on too long, although perhaps this is the perhaps best summed up by the quote that the LPDF offered to the press on the NPPF when it emerged, which was basically along the lines of the minister following through with commitments to get the building blocks of the planning system, the Labour's aspiration for the planning system in place by the end of 2025. So fair play to the ministers and the civil servant team who've worked incredibly hard to get the planning and infrastructure bill enacted and the NPPF published. But then the minister went on in May, we're going to focus on delivery. So, okay, fine. We've had the year of, reform, waiting for reform. We've got the building blocks. Now let's get on and focus on delivery and focus on the detail.
I think, and I assume, Ben, you're due to invite me on my thoughts, so I'll weigh in. And I think I feel similar in sentiment of 2025 in January, coming out of the blocks fast. It was very intentional from all of our clients really to get applications in. Now they had the confidence of what had come out in December 2024, and there was a real hive of positivity around what was going on, and I think to some extent, because the government came out so quickly between July and December with everything, it's almost a bit hard to live up to. It's a bit like asking Boxing Day to live up to Christmas Day in planning nerd terms, but it meant really, I think, that the industry was so enthusiastic, got loads and loads of applications in, and it was kind of then wait and see how is grey belt going to be tested in appeals, in those different scenarios. How were authorities going to react to a proposed compressed timescale of 30 months for their local plans? Were they going to feel the pressure? And also, I think it would be remiss not to talk about the sort of effects of merging councils and the way in which people have had to put forward their proposals. And that, again, is sort of a building block for that strategic planning that everyone was talking about. Is it the revival of regional spatial strategies, or is it completely new? I think we've seen a lot of proposals coming in. I think the deadline was November 2025, and some came a little earlier than that. So there's certain mechanisms which aren't the pure planning reform, so to speak, but that have been going on to really lead into what the next moves may be. But we did feel a hesitancy as we were getting towards the budget as well, and waiting to see what would happen. I mean, a lot of our clients were pushing for a new Help to Buy scheme or another iteration of that. So I think in planning reform terms, so much came out. We then were letting it settle, and also, to get the planning infrastructure bill through to enact is a big milestone. So I think 2025 an exciting year, but with peaks and troughs probably in that excitement, and really setting us up for now a quite exciting 2026 of hopefully driving forwards.
Yeah, I think as you say, Sam, it's 2025 was a year of kind of preparation on the starting blocks, um, gearing up for the green light, so to speak, or the starting pistol. I suppose from a non-planning point of view, it can be quite frustrating because everyone wants to build, developers want to build, local authorities want to meet local plans. And as we say, when the government first came in and made these big changes, everyone thought, oh, this is brilliant. But at the same time, everyone knows that changes don't happen overnight, and so we've had this kind of 12 months of setting the foundations for what could be a few years of growth. And I think everyone's kind of impatient, but recognizes that you need to put those foundations in first before you then fire out the starting blocks and start building. I'm interested in Grey Belt because when it first came out and was first announced, it was, hit quite a few headlines. Um, but in your experience, I'll come to you both, but Sam first, has it really made a huge difference? Have we seen many success stories for developers who are trying to build on what is being classed as grey belt land?
You've got two facets to grey belt, I think, Ben. You've got the politics and you've got the practicalities. And the politics, I don't think, like I said before, I don't think you can underestimate just what a shift, just what a nettle or a thorn has been grasped with grey belt, because you go back. We only have to go back 2 years to Michael Gove's last NPPF, that basically said to local authorities, you don't have to amend your green belt, and the vast majority of local authorities do not want to amend their green belt. So without that political shift, there would be around our major towns and cities continued unmet need that's been going on for generations in some cases. So grey belt, I think, was the politics of it was quite subtle. It was, as you suggest, it was scrubby wasteland and car parks and things as the initial proposition. And the practical definition that planners are grappling with is somewhat looser, and the politics may start to swing back the other way when that becomes apparent, especially if quality schemes aren't being perceived. Quality of schemes is not what has been promised on these greenbelt sites. But I don't think you can underestimate just how much Greybelt is contributing to what will be an uptick in planning applications this year for the first time, in a while. That uptick is not coming from, in the main, tall building schemes in major cities. It's not coming yet from SMEs looking at building small schemes on small sites. That uptick is going to be driven by Greybelt sites, and so I think the politics of it should be welcomed, and I think actually the definition of how it's been crafted is elegant, is quite sophisticated, and I hope that even though opposition politicians are making something of it now, were those opposition politicians to find themselves pulling the levers of power themselves anytime soon, that they would keep it as a policy because it is doing what it's supposed to be doing.
Yeah, thank you. It's an interesting one as well because there's a lot has been made around planning being a key blocker to housing and so on, and it's good to hear that there's going to be, we're anticipating an uptick in planning applications, local authorities suddenly being flooded with applications. But are there enough planning officers to actually look at those applications and churn through them and either approve or deny them? Are we not just walking into another bottleneck? And I know that the government has announced funding to train new planning officers, but again, that's going to take a while to come in. So are we, as I say, are we hurtling towards another bottleneck? Are there enough officers to actually make decisions on these applications?
I'll wade in on that one, Annabel, and I welcome your thoughts. But the default in these circumstances, in these situations, is to say LPAs need resources. Now, of course, there has been a hollowing out in the age of austerity of the number of planners working in the public sector, and something of a brain drain, particularly at that kind of more senior principal kind of officer, experienced officer level. But it's not just resources. I don't think. So Litchfield's and LPDF published some research in the spring of 2025, the headline of which was major outline applications taking 2 years in 2024 compared to 8 months in 2014. and you'd immediately think that, well, there's a hollowing out, and that's because there aren't enough planning officers. But actually, that's based on fewer planning applications. So proportionately, I think we need to be thinking about productivity and the way that these applications are being transacted. Yes, resources. Don't get me wrong, but you've also got two live initiatives at the minute are the focus on statutory consultees, and planners having to wait for responses from highways authorities and environmental health, or non-statutory consultees, or Natural England, or holding objections from the Highways Agency, and all of this kind of thing. And at the other end of the process, delays attributed to Section 106 agreements and things. And it's not just planners; it's local authority solicitors and all of that kind of thing. So yes, we need more experienced, confident planners working in local authority environments that are incentivized to want to see things happen. But those application timeframes only come down by taking a kind of whole system approach and digging into why those timeframes have increased beyond the resources point.
Yeah, I think I would broadly agree. I think it's about resource in the broader sense of the term as well, in terms of systems and setups. And some authorities have had a lot more motivation or technological innovation in their systems to try and help officers with being more efficient. None of them really want to sit there wading through certain information that's coming through that they could process in a more efficient way, just through practical administrative matters. Obviously, they want to then consider that thoroughly and do the job that they enjoy doing, which is actually assessing, engaging, and weighing that planning balance and looking at in the whole. So I think it's interesting to hear that I had some authorities speaking to me the other day about the way they're using AI to speed up validation processes, which would probably take out some of the stress at the start of that process, but also about the way in which their communications are happening between, like I say, statutory consultees. There's one particular authority we're dealing with where they've got like a weekly highways surgery, sort of as they call it, and the engagement that they found since implementing that process for the that kind of officer level you're talking about there, sort of seniors and principals, to engage on a similar level with the highways team and sort of add ad hoc queries to the list, rather than just having to get the formal responses back, having that deadline, having a big chunk of information to digest and put something out at the end, which they've been finding as a helpful mechanism to engage. But I think also that there has to be some consideration to the way in which applicants put forward what the information, and I think it's the onus on us as consultants and as teams to try and make it as fluid as possible. And it's about structuring your statement, structuring what you put together in a way that both laypersons can understand, so that those engaged in the process who aren't professionals can start to digest, but also so that officers can, when applying it to either committee papers or reserve matters, sort of delegated decisions or things like that, they can actually extract the information in a way where it's easily interpretable. The volume of papers that now are in an outline application are far away from what an outline application would have been some time ago as well. So that statistic is partly also by that increase of what information is meant to be put forward. And I know there was some thoughts rumbling, I think, in the industry at one point in time that permission in principle, could you expand the remit of that, because it is currently only for those minor applications and certain circumstances with the Brownfield Register. And I don't think that's the worst idea, because we're looking to particularly motivate SME developers and things, and that isn't just in the below 10 units threshold. That's maybe below 50 units or something. And in that circumstance, could you look at something more around a permission in principle type of mechanism? So I think there's other ways we can move forward. And I think resource, massively welcomed. And I think obviously the financial situation of trying to get planning applications to cover their costs and things like that has been broadly welcomed by the industry, because it's not a case of we don't want the funding to match, so to speak. It's not trying to get away with having a cheaper application fee for the sake of it. People actually genuinely want the level of service. They want councils to be funded in the appropriate way, and to be able to engage properly.
Good, thank you. So, before we go on to talk about 2026, the government have made a lot of really great noises around unlocking planning. You've got Steve Reed talking about build, baby, build. The NPPF in December, there was lots of talk around yes. So it was yes to brownfield sites, yes to sites near railway lines. Now, if I was going to put my NIMBY hat on, I would be thinking about the Conservatives a few years ago talking about beautiful sites and building beauty and all that kind of thing. Should I be worried that these automatic yeses for some developments that meet certain criteria might mean that in a few years' time we've got a lot of quite ugly developments that have sprung up that, yes, have eased the housing crisis, but actually don't look very nice at all and are sitting in my back garden?
And I'm not suggesting you're a layperson, Ben, but it would be easy for a layperson to take at face value the press releases that the MHCLG comms team issue, and come to that kind of conclusion, because yes, the top line and build baby build and all of that kind of stuff is about unleashing this and unblocking that and so on and so forth. The practical consequences of the changes to the NPPF will work themselves through, but I don't think anybody could reasonably describe what's been published as a default yes in practical terms. It's not a default yes. Arguably, the planning permission, were one granted, would come with the same strings and conditions as a planning consent granted 6 months or 2 years ago, insofar as what it looks like and obligations and so on and so forth. What the government I think are trying to do is tilt more strongly the presumption that these kind of sites are supported a little bit more towards making them happen and making it a little bit harder for objectors to object to them, if you like, in the planning balance. So not a default yes, and that is something of a bone of contention. Annabel will know what I'm talking about when we talk about national development management policies and the argument as to whether or not they should be statutory or non-statutory in the context of a Secretary of State promising to turn over every stone and build 1.5 million. I mean, there really would have been something that would have got closer to that default yes. So I guess all I mean to say is Ben, that just. And I think probably actually thinking about it, that's one of the main reasons for frustration probably amongst the LPDF membership, let alone the layperson, because a layperson can read something and forget about it again tomorrow, whereas we're all at certainly our members are at the coalface at the front line and trying to get permissions. Is that gap between the rhetoric and the reality? Is that gap between turbocharging this and unleashing something else? And it's still actually being like platting fog, to actually get a planning permission. So anybody, trying to get to a committee or having got to a committee trying to get a 106 signed, being told about default yeses, will just chuckle wryly at you, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think our development director, on the day that they were talking about the sort of default yes to the railway development, she sent me a message and just said, what do you think? Do you think this will actually result in a presumed yes, 100% sort of thing? Because she was getting some people on the phone and saying how and what is the detail in it? And I sort of said, look, it might it might shift that balance, and hopefully it does. I mean, realistically, lots of sites that are already being considered and put forward are still would kind of have a presumption in favour in those locations because they are, in theory, the most sustainable locations in the first place. And there may be considerable brownfield land as well around certain stations, etc. So I sort of said, I'm not sure I see it as turning the dial so fundamentally, but also I don't see it as a default yes on urban design terms and all those other requirements. That doesn't change. It just might say the land, and this is the distinction between the land and the development. The land might have more of a presumed yes towards development coming forwards, but that development itself, the proposal will be scrutinised still. You can't just say, oh, well, we'll chuck up, a 10-story block that's, in some particular unwieldy fashion. It will be scrutinised as to how it fits into the setting and the local context. You still weigh those matters in the balance. It's not just completely gone. And so I would say still the scrutiny and the conversations we're having with our master planners and our designers is the same degree. We're still having workshops on these things. We're still trying to refine it and make it a lot more positive. And it still puts, some people were saying, will this mean pre-apps have less value because you're not necessarily arguing as much about the principle of development in those conversations? But actually, the pre-apps are still needed and are still very much there to actually get some of that confidence about the line in which you're going down on design terms. So I think there's still the same level of scrutiny. Yes, there isn't an office for place anymore, and it does change the rhetoric and the mantra, but I don't think it fundamentally shifts what people will be looking for in terms of things actually being good design. We're not looking for more carbuncle cups in this contestants in what we're doing here.
Okay, great, thank you. So we've talked about 2025. It was a year very much of consultations and working papers and talking. 2026 now, if the government wants to hit its target of 1.5 million homes, and everyone's opinion on that, differs, it really needs to be the year of action. So, Sam, what's on the LPDF's wish list for Steve Reed, Matthew Pennycook, the kind of bold decisions that you're looking for them to make this year?
I think Ben, I'd go back to where we started about building blocks and then subsequent delivery. So we now know, I think, with the Planning and Infrastructure Bill and the NPPF, we now know the planning system that the current government would like to see by the end of this Parliament. If you see what I mean, we have national decision-making policies and national plan-making policies in the NPPF. There is a clear drive there for a more rules-based, not so much codified, but a more kind of procedural planning system. If you have land in this kind of location, in these kind of circumstances, then it should be expected that you can do this kind of thing with it. So more of a route map to approvals if you are a prospective applicant, and more of a route map to refusals or approvals if you are a local planning authority. Decision trees, I think, it will probably end up being the way that people will express the new NPPF. Would be my sense. So that's operating up there. Underneath that, Annabelle's alluded to spatial development strategies, which are going to be key to dealing with the unmet need coming out of towns and cities that hasn't been dealt with before, that I mentioned before. And where you've got a combined authority, it's pretty clear where those spatial development strategy boundaries will be. But there are very many parts of the country still where that geography is unclear, and it's also unclear as to how spatial development strategies that combine over a housing market area will work together to deal with that unmet need, because those boundaries and those geographies can be a bit messy. But national policies are up here, emerging. Spatial development strategies and the devolution agenda needs to crystallise underneath that very quickly. With that in place, I think you can make more meaningful progress on local plan making reform, announcements around which the Minister made at the LPDF conference in November. So all of a sudden, you can start to see nationally, sub-regionally, and locally what the operation of the planning system, once those commitments and the need for secondary legislation and so on has flowed through. So that's coherent, and I think everybody would be looking for a settled policy and legislative environment whilst those commitments work their way through. So building blocks, then delivery.
Yeah, I think I I agree. I think there is something to be said for now getting some of these elements set up and actually into action. So, for example, the Laura set up the process potentially for Section 73B, and that is something which we've been on the precipice of for some time, it feels like. And it would be nice to know, is that coming? In which way is it definitely coming? Because I think it was part of one of the working papers about how that might come forward, and there's been a bit of a quieter time since then. And that could make a difference for schemes which have maybe been stuck. They're older sort of decisions potentially, and need some um, evolution to come forward and to really help with that. Driving the 1.5 million is helping not just new sites or sites which have not had an application in before come forward, but it's also those that are facing some troubles. I think further clarity on viability and how that is going to be assessed, particularly in the grey belt cases, and seeing how that pans through will make quite a big difference too. So I think some of those elements. I mean, I was pleased to see that the NPPG came out in 2025 regarding the sequential testing, and that had been long awaited as well. So I think, but again, that didn't hit the big headlines because it's not as sexy as Sam sort of termed, but it is very fundamentally helpful to those in the industry where you've been sort of piecing together lots of decisions to get to what the position is and understand it, but now actually there's something a bit more concrete there. And I think with the duty to cooperate gone, which people knew was on the horizon, it really does mean that assessing what those strategic areas are going to be, how there is going to be a requirement for collaboration in another way. It needs to be worked through for those making new local plans and under that particular pressure. I also think some of the things, like the softer side of things to some extent, but the training for committee members and things, that is something that's been mentioned throughout the sort of national scheme of delegation, the changes to planning committees, what they'll be considering, potentially narrowing, but also then the expectation that what they will consider, hopefully they'll have more understanding of some of the technicalities around, and be better prepared to make some of those decisions. So I'm hoping that some of those elements start to come through, as well as people, getting fully to grips with what the NDMPs actually mean, and when they come into full force.
I think it feels like hope is the key word. As we've had a good year of laying the basics. I think the hope now is that we can start seeing some of that translating into action, notwithstanding that the government has various other challenges related to the housing industry to deal with, like skill shortages and land values and all the rest of it. So it's a bit of a Gordian knot to untie, but it looks like the government is making good progress. We are fast running out of time. Sam, just finally from you, the LPDF. What else are your members saying to you that they would like to see in the next 12 months?
Well, I mean, you alluded to kind of challenges around viability. I think there, Ben, we did make a big push running into the budget around the case for first-time buyer support. It became pretty stark actually towards the end of the summer just how much members were struggling with the housing market, particularly in the south. I mean, we're talking rates of sale that not seen since the credit crunch. Builders selling one house a month. I mean, this is not good. So we did work with Savills on getting a submission into the Treasury on trying to make that case as just to highlight the scale of the issue and try to table some constructive solutions as to what that support for first-time buyers might look like. That case was not won, obviously, in the run-up to the budget, but we're going to keep making some noise about that ahead of the spring statement. So that's on our list. Same with the landfill tax. Actually, that hasn't gone away, and is potentially quite crippling as a development cost. And then the other area of work, we've got a hook in the NPPF to be talking about the unmet need for industrial and logistics space. we've been pushing for a national freight strategy in submissions to government over the last 18 months, 2 years or so. So we're going to try to keep making a noise on that. It's very easy for discussions around planning to focus on housing and housing numbers, particularly. It dominates local plans to the expense of all other things that local planners should be doing. And with the introduction of SDSs, which is the greater than local tier that strategic employment space needs to be dealt with, how are they going to be assessing the need for that space through those kind of processes? So they're some of the other priorities of ours this year.
Fabulous, thank you. Wonderful. Well, thank you both very much. If anybody is listening and wants to find out more, what's the best way of contacting you? Annabel, we'll go to you
Yeah,
first.
so my email address is on the Brookbanks website. More than happy to receive inbox content there, and also via LinkedIn. You'll find me on there, relatively active and happy to receive a message, have a conversation.
Brilliant. And Sam?
Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn too, and I can be contacted directly via sams@lpdf.co.uk.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And also you can head over to the Brookbanks website, brookbanks.com. You can contact us through there. So that's it. We have run out of time. It remains for me to say, Annabel, Sam, thank you very much for your discussion and for your chat. And to anyone who's listening, we'll see you next time.